The wind carried dust across the wide, cracked plains, rattling through the dry brush like an old ghost. For the two hard-bitten brothers who worked the barren ranch north of Fort Bowie, every sunrise meant another day of struggle against hunger, debt, and the land itself. Samuel and Thomas Callahan were their names. Thin men with lean faces, born of Irish stock and raised by hardship more than by parents. Their father had died in a mining accident, their mother in a long fever, leaving the boys with nothing but a rundown shack, a stretch of unforgiving soil, and the iron will to keep going when everything else seemed to demand they quit. Sam was the elder, broad-shouldered, quiet, and careful in his words. Tom was quicker, both in his wit and his temper. A restless spirit with a streak of recklessness that often landed him in fights he could not afford. Together they worked the ranch with a pair of worn-out mules and a broken plow, mending fences with scraps of old iron and living mostly on beans, hardtack, and the rare rabbit they managed to catch. On that particular evening, the sun dropped red and swollen behind the mountains, and the brothers were returning from a long day of hauling water from the river. Sam noticed it first, the faint, broken cry echoing off the rocks. At first he thought it was some wounded animal caught in the canyon, but as they paused, straining their ears, the sound carried again. It was not an animal at all. It was a girl's voice, weak, ragged, yet pleading for life. The brothers exchanged a glance. Danger lingered in such cries. In those days, with Apache raids still fresh in every settler's mind, no white man rode into a canyon without caution. But there was something in that cry that gnawed at Sam, something human and desperate. "We can't just ride past," he said, his voice low. Tom spat in the dust, shifting in the saddle. Could be a trap. Could be we walk in and never walk out. Sam looked again toward the canyon's shadow. Or could be someone's dying. They argued no further. Hunger and poverty had made them cautious men, but hardship had also carved out a kind of stubborn decency in them. They turned their mules toward the canyon and descended into its red stone throat. The sight that met them would mark their lives forever. Lying half hidden in the scrub was a girl, no older than 13, her face streaked with blood and dirt. Her clothing, torn buckskin, marked her as Apache, and the raw, angry bruises along her arms told of violence. She tried to lift herself when she saw the men, but her body failed her. Her lips moved soundlessly, only a rasp of breath escaping. Tom cursed under his breath, torn between fear and pity. "Apache, Sam. If their people find us with her." But Sam had already dismounted, kneeling beside her, pressing a hand to her forehead. Her skin burned with fever, her eyes black as obsidian, locked on his with a mixture of terror and pleading that cut straight through him. "She won't live another night out here," he said. "We take her." And so the Callahan brothers made the decision that would bind their fates to hers. They carried her back to their shack, wrapped in Sam's worn coat. Through the long night they tended her with the little they had. Clean water, scraps of bread softened in broth, strips of cloth torn from their bedding. She drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering words in Apache they did not understand. Sometimes she cried out in nightmares, clutching at the air as if reaching for someone lost. By dawn she was breathing easier, though still weak. Tom, pacing the dirt floor, shook his head. "We're dead men if her people come looking. They'll skin us alive." Sam, weary from keeping vigil, only answered, "Then we'll face it. She's just a child." For 3 weeks the girl remained in their care. Slowly, strength returned to her thin frame. She ate what little they could spare, drank deeply of the water they hauled, and watched them with wary eyes. Her name, they learned after much effort, was Nashtoitso, which meant Big Moon. She spoke little English then, only broken words, but her gratitude needed no translation. She helped them mend fences once she could walk again. And though Tom remained uneasy, even he could not deny the girl's resilience. But the West was not a land that forgot or forgave easily. One evening, riders appeared on the horizon, Apache warriors painted and armed. The brothers' blood ran cold. They knew what harboring the girl could mean. Yet when the riders reached the ranch, Nashtoitso stepped forward, speaking rapidly in her tongue, her voice trembling yet strong. After tense words exchanged, the warriors finally turned their eyes on the brothers. Their leader spoke in halting English. "You saved her. You gave her life back." Sam bowed his head, uncertain if it meant blessing or doom. The Apache leader studied them for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "You are not forgotten." And just like that they rode away, taking the girl with them. The shack felt emptier than ever. The brothers returned to their endless toil, never knowing if they would see her again. Years passed. The Callahan brothers grew older. Their ranch no less poor, but their bond unbroken. They spoke sometimes of the girl in the canyon, wondering what became of her if she had survived, if she even remembered the ragged men who had carried her out of death's shadow. What they did not know was that 20 years later, the girl would return, not as a helpless child but as a woman, a leader hardened by sorrow and sharpened by destiny. And she would not come alone, she would come with an army. 20 years can strip the strength from a man's back and carve deep lines into his face. For Samuel and Thomas Callahan, those years were measured not by clocks or calendars but by the unending rhythm of labor. Plowing, mending, hauling, and enduring. The ranch had grown no richer in all that time, though the brothers had grown older, slower, and wearier of a land that never yielded enough to match their effort. Sam's hair turned to gray before his 40th year, the color of dust and winter frost. His shoulders, once broad, stooped under the weight of endless burdens. Tom, though leaner and quicker by nature, bore scars of barroom brawls and half-healed injuries from thrown horses and bad luck. They were men bound together by blood and hardship, and though they rarely spoke of it, they carried in the back of their minds the memory of a girl they had once saved in a canyon. The West had changed in those years. Forts expanded. Telegraph wires stretched across miles of prairie. Railroads cut through the mountains with shrieking iron, and towns once no more than saloons and stables grew into places with schools and churches. But for poor ranchers like the Callahans, change meant little. The wealthy landowners swallowed more territory, cattle barons hired guns to enforce their will, and homesteaders without money or power. Men like Sam and Tom clung to their scraps of dirt by sheer will. The brothers had thought once of marriage, of finding wives through mail-order notices like others did. But poverty was its own prison. No woman answered their letters. No pastor came to bless their shack, and so their evenings were spent by firelight alone, the silence broken only by Tom's restless talk and Sam's long silences. Yet there were moments when the moon cast silver over the desert, when the coyotes sang their lonely songs, when Sam remembered the girl, Nashdoitso, who had lain broken in the canyon. He remembered the fire in her eyes as she pleaded for life, the way she had stood before her people to shield the brothers from vengeance. He had never seen her again. Perhaps she had married, or perhaps she had been taken in some raid, or perhaps the desert had claimed her after all. Still, her memory returned to him in dreams, haunting and unshakable. Tom, for his part, rarely spoke of her, though sometimes when drink loosened his tongue, he muttered about the danger they had courted that night, how close they had come to being gutted by Apache blades. But even in his cynicism, he admitted one truth. She owed us nothing, Sam, and yet she made them spare us. That counts for something. The years ground on, each season harsher than the last. Droughts cracked the earth. Winters froze their meager stock, and debts piled higher. They fought off rustlers once, nearly dying in the attempt, and always they endured. Until the summer of the 20th year, when everything changed. It began with whispers drifting through the saloons of Fort Bowie, talk of Apache raiders returning in force. Not scattered bands, but something more organized, more deliberate. Ranchers spoke of villages emptied overnight, of caravans ambushed, of riders seen in the distance moving like a shadow army across the land. The army patrols muttered of a new leader, a woman with hair black as night and a gaze that could burn through a man's soul. Sam heard the talk while trading for flour one afternoon. The description chilled him. It was foolish, he told himself, coincidence, nothing more. The child they had saved could not have become this figure the soldiers feared, but the seed of unease burrowed into him nonetheless. Then came the night the storm arrived at their doorstep. The brothers were mending a broken corral under the pale light of the moon when they heard it. The distant thunder of hooves, dozens, perhaps hundreds, rolling across the plain. The mules screamed in terror. The brothers froze, their hammers dropping into the dust. Out of the darkness rode a column of Apache warriors, their lances tipped with glinting steel, their ponies swift and sure. At their head rode a figure cloaked in shadow until she drew closer, the firelight from the brothers' shack flickering across her face. She was no longer the frail child they had once carried from death. She was a woman now, tall, commanding, her hair braided with silver ornaments that shimmered like stars. Scars traced her arms, proof of battles fought and survived, but it was her eyes that struck Sam to the core. Dark, unyielding, yet not without memory. Nash Doitso. She reined her horse before them, the warriors falling silent behind her. The desert wind lifted her braid across her shoulder. Her gaze swept over the two ragged brothers, and for a long moment the years fell away. "I know you," she said, her voice steady, strong, carrying the weight of 2 decades. "You are the ones who saved me." Sam felt his breath leave him as though the earth itself had shifted beneath his feet. Tom swallowed hard, his usual bravado gone. "You remember?" Sam said softly. "I remember everything," she answered, "and I have not forgotten." But the question lingered, sharp as a blade. Had she returned as friend? Or as judge? The warriors around her watched in silence, their hands close to their weapons, waiting for her command. The brothers stood unarmed, their future balanced on the edge of whatever this woman, this girl they once carried from a canyon, would decide. The storm had come at last. The silence after her words was heavier than any gunshot. Sam stood with the hammer still dangling from his hand, his fingers numb, his eyes locked on hers. Tom shifted his weight nervously, every muscle taut like a cornered wolf. They had spent 20 years wondering if the girl had survived, and now here she was, alive, commanding, returned with warriors at her back. Nashdoitso dismounted slowly, her moccasins sinking into the dry earth with a soft crunch. The warriors remained mounted, silent as stone, their faces unreadable in the flickering light. She walked forward until the firelight revealed her features more clearly. High cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that held no trace of childhood innocence, only the deep shadows of experience. "Do you know what became of me after you left me with my people?" she asked. Her voice was not bitter nor tender. It was the voice of someone who had learned to speak only truth, even when truth cut like a blade. Sam lowered his eyes. "We wondered. We prayed you lived." A faint smile crossed her lips, not of joy but of recognition. "I lived, but not as a child should live." She sat on a stone near the fire, her braid falling across her shoulder, and the warriors leaned slightly closer, as if her every word were law. Then she began to tell the story the brothers had never known. After the Callahans returned her to her people, she had been both cherished and cursed. She was alive only because of them, and that marked her with a strange fate. Some in her band saw her survival as a gift of the spirits, a sign she was chosen for something greater. Others whispered she had been tainted by the hands of white men, that her rescue carried shame and weakness. From her earliest years, she bore the weight of suspicion and expectation alike. Her father had been a warrior, fierce and unyielding, who demanded she grow strong enough to silence every doubt. He trained her with bow and lance, taught her to ride until she could keep pace with the fastest scouts, and hardened her heart against the cruelty of the world. Her mother, gentler, reminded her of kindness, of the girl she had been when she lay half dead in a canyon. But war and loss stripped away that softness. Raids came and soldiers struck back. She saw villages burned, children carried away, elders starved in camps. She learned to fight, to survive, to lead. By the time she was 16, she had already killed to protect her people. By 20, she had lost both parents to war, and so she rose, not because she sought power, but because the people demanded it. They needed someone unbroken, someone who had walked through fire and returned alive. "The army calls me a raider," she said, her gaze burning into the brothers. "They call me outlaw, savage, murderer, but I fight because I must. The desert does not forgive the weak. Every step I take is for my people's survival." She paused, her voice lowering, softer now. "And yet in the darkest nights, when I wonder if my soul has turned to stone, I remember 2 men. 2 poor ranchers who had nothing, who risked everything to save a dying girl. And I ask myself, if such men exist, then perhaps the world is not all cruelty." The words struck Sam like a hammer to the chest. He had expected resentment, perhaps vengeance, but not this. This confession that their small act of mercy had become a torch she carried through the darkness. Tom cleared his throat, uneasy with the weight of the moment. "Then why come back now? After 20 years, why ride to us with an army?" Her eyes hardened again, the softness retreating behind the steel of leadership. "Because the land is changing. The cattle barons take more than they need. The soldiers drive us farther into the mountains. The rivers are fenced, the hunting grounds stripped bare. I must choose who is enemy and who may be ally, and before I chose, I had to see you again." The brothers exchanged a long, silent glance. Sam's face was unreadable, but Tom's jaw clenched with unease. They knew what she was asking without saying it aloud. Loyalty, perhaps shelter, perhaps even alliance in a war that could consume everything. And yet beneath the warrior's strength, Sam thought he saw a flicker of something else, a memory, a debt. a bond that had never been broken. Nash Doitso rose to her feet again, her warriors straightening at the motion. I did not forget. You gave me life when you could have turned away. Now I give you a choice. Stand with me, or stand in the way of what must come. The fire crackled, sparks rising into the desert night. The air was thick with the weight of fate, as though the land itself held its breath. Sam looked into her eyes and saw not just the girl he had once carried, nor just the leader hardened by battle, but both at once. A woman forged from mercy and war, still bound to him by something deeper than time. And Tom, restless and suspicious, muttered under his breath, God help us all. The night after Nash Doitso returned to their lives, neither Sam nor Tom found rest. The fire in their shack burned low, throwing long shadows across the walls, and every creak of the wind sounded like distant hoofbeats. Sam sat by the dying, embers staring into them as if they could answer the questions gnawing at his soul. Tom paced, restless, chewing at his lip and muttering curses under his breath. She's trouble, Sam, Tom finally said, his voice harsh with the strain of holding back fear. You saw those riders, 50, maybe more, warriors hardened to kill, and she leads them. She's not the girl you remember, she's death-walking. Sam did not answer at once. He lifted a coal with the poker, watching it glow red, then set it back. She's alive because of us, and she came back because of that. You think that means nothing? It means we're caught in the middle of a war we can't survive. Tom leaned against the wall, his arms crossed tight across his chest. You saw her eyes. She's not here to thank us. She's here to use us. She wants allies on this side of the river. White men she can point to and say, see, not all are enemies. And when the soldiers ride, they'll come for us first. Sam rubbed his temples, weary beyond words. You think I don't know that? But what choice do we have? Turn her away? Spit on the only memory in 20 years that proved this land hasn't turned every soul cruel? For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the coyotes howled, their cries rising and falling like lamentations carried on the wind. The next morning, Nash Doitso returned, this time without her riders. She came on foot, her hair braided back, her step steady. The brothers were repairing a broken section of fence when she approached. Tom stiffened immediately, but Sam nodded in greeting. You have questions, she said, her tone neither demanding nor pleading. Sam set down his hammer. We have more than questions. We have fears. Men around here barely tolerate us. They call us poor dirt farmers, not worth their bullets. If they think we're with you, then they will hate you, she said plainly. But they already hate me. They already hate anyone who does not bow to their fences, their laws, their hunger for land. You live at the edge, just as I do. You survive in the cracks left behind. That is why I came to you. Because you understand. Tom barked a bitter laugh. Understand? I understand hunger, yes. I understand being spit on by ranchers who own 10,000 acres while we break our backs for nothing. I understand being beaten in town because we can't pay our debts, but I don't understand standing against the U.S. Army with a handful of warriors. That's suicide. Nash Doitso looked at him, her eyes unflinching. Then you have never been forced to choose between death in chains and death with dignity. Her words cut deep. Sam felt them strike something in his chest he had never dared name. For 20 years he and Tom had endured, not lived, clinging to survival, never daring to dream of anything more. The weight of those years pressed, heavier in that moment, and he wondered if perhaps he had indeed chosen chains without ever realizing it. For days the tension grew. Nash Doitso and her warriors made camp in the hills, close enough for the brothers to see the fires at night. Word spread quickly through the settlements and ranches. Soon, riders came bearing warnings. Soldiers from the fort would march to clear the hills. Settlers urged the Callahans to join the posse forming in town. You'll fight with us, won't you? One rancher demanded, his eyes sharp with suspicion. Or are you keeping company with them? Sam held his tongue, but Tom spoke fast, swearing loyalty to the town, to the flag, to anything that would get the man off their land. Yet as the riders left, Tom turned to Sam with fury. We're done for. No matter what we say, they don't trust us. And she doesn't trust us either. We're walking a rope that's fraying by the minute. Sam gazed toward the hills where her fires burned. Maybe it isn't about trust, he said quietly. Maybe it's about choosing who we are before the land chooses for us. That evening, Nashdoitso came again, this time with only one guard at her side. She told them more of her people's suffering, of promises broken by treaties, of soldiers who brought gifts with one hand and shackles with the other. She spoke not like a raider, but like a woman who carried the weight of an entire people's survival on her shoulders. And as she spoke, Sam felt something awaken in him, something he had buried under years of toil and silence. He felt the stirrings of belief, of purpose, of loyalty, not born of law but of gratitude, of a bond deeper than blood. But Tom saw only doom. After she left, he grabbed his brother by the arm. You're falling under her spell. I see it in your eyes. She'll drag us into hell, Sam, and she won't look back. Sam pulled free, his jaw set. Maybe hell is better than wasting away here forgotten, until the land buries us with nothing to show we ever lived. For the first time in years, the brothers stood not side by side but opposed, torn between the call of survival and the pull of something greater. And in the distance, drums began to beat from the hills. Steady, low, the sound of a storm gathering its strength. The nights grew heavy with unease. Every evening the Callahans could see the glow of Apache fires burning on the ridges, and every morning, rumors drifted down from town like dust on the wind. Soldiers from the fort were drilling. Ranchers were gathering men. The army was not willing to let Nashdoitso's presence go unanswered. The brothers' poor ranch, lying between the fort and the hills, had become a no-man's land, a fragile strip of earth upon which the storm would soon break. Sam felt the weight of each day pressing harder against his shoulders. While Tom drowned his fears in whiskey and curses, Sam found himself drawn toward the hills, toward the campfires where Nashdoitso's people gathered. Sometimes he would ride at dusk when the desert turned red and gold, and he would find her standing apart from the others, her silhouette sharp against the fading light. Their conversations were not like those he had known with other settlers. She spoke little of small matters, never wasted words on gossip or idle talk. Instead, her voice carried the rhythm of memory and struggle, of survival pulled from the teeth of despair. She told him of nights hiding in dry arroyos while soldiers hunted them like animals, of winters when food was so scarce they chewed bark and boiled leather. She told him of the way her people looked to her now, not as a woman who could choose her own path, but as a leader bound to carry the weight of every life. And Sam listened. More than that, he understood. For though his hardships were different, he knew the hollow ache of hunger, the slow grind of despair, the loneliness that carved a man hollow until he became no more than a shadow of himself. One night as they stood on the ridge looking out over the moonlit desert, she turned to him and said, "You saved me once when I was helpless, but now you see me as I am. Do you still believe I am worth saving?" The question cut deeper than any blade. Sam met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "I don't believe it," he said quietly. "I know it." For a moment, her hard composure softened. The corners of her lips curved, not into a smile of triumph, but into something far rarer, a smile of recognition, of trust. Back at the ranch, Tom saw the change in his brother and hated it. He could not name the feeling. Fear, jealousy, perhaps even betrayal. But it gnawed at him. He watched Sam return late from the ridges, his eyes carrying a fire Tom had not seen in years, and instead of relief, Tom felt dread. "You're losing yourself," Tom spat one night, his voice sharp and bitter. "She's turned your head, filled it with stories and lies. She's no savior, Sam. She's a raider, a killer. If you can't see that, then you're blind." Sam leaned across the table, his voice low and firm. "And what have we been, Tom? Scraping dirt, begging for scraps, waiting to die? Maybe you're content with that, but I'm not. She fights for her people. Maybe it's time we fought for something too." Tom slammed his fist against the table, rattling the tin plates. "Fight for what? You think her war will make us rich? You think the army will forgive us if we stand with her? They'll hang us, Sam. Hang us and burn what's left of this shack, and she'll keep riding while we rot." The brothers stared at each other, and in that silence lay the deepest fracture their bond had ever known. Days passed, and the drumbeats from the hills grew louder. Scouts brought word. The army would march within the week. A column of soldiers, rifles polished, bayonets fixed, was already preparing to strike. Settlers sharpened their knives and counted bullets. Ashtoitso came to the brothers one last time before the storm. She stood in the doorway of their shack, tall and silent, her warriors waiting in the distance. "When the soldiers come," she said, her voice steady as the desert wind, "you will have to choose. Stand aside and survive with shame, or stand with me and carry the fire of what we once shared." Sam felt the earth shift beneath him. Every memory, every hardship, every dream he had buried surged inside him. He saw not just the warrior before him, but the girl he had once carried, the bond that had never broken, the unspoken tether between them, and he knew, though the choice would tear him from his brother, where his heart lay. But Tom's heart had already chosen differently. As Ashtoitso departed, her braid catching the last rays of the setting sun, Tom muttered under his breath, "If she doesn't kill us, the army will, and I'll be damned if I let either happen without a fight of my own." Sam heard him but said nothing. Outside, the horizon darkened. Clouds gathered, and with them came the smell of rain, sharp and electric, as though the desert itself waited for blood to soak into its soil. Dawn came heavy with silence, as though the land itself braced for blood. The desert air was thick, carrying no bird call, no breeze, only the distant tremor of hooves and the creak of wagon wheels. From the ridges, Apache scouts had already seen the column of soldiers snaking its way from Fort Bowie. Blue coats glinting, rifles slung, cannons dragged behind mule teams. Dust rose like a ghost behind them. Sam stood on the ridge with Ashtoitso looking down at the approaching army. Her warriors stood behind her, painted and armed, their faces solemn. She wore no war paint herself, only the braids bound tight against her shoulders and the silver ornaments that flashed with every breath of sun. Her gaze was steady, but he could feel the fire burning beneath it. "It begins," she said softly. He nodded, though his throat was dry, "and we will stand with you." But those words were not true for all. Tom had left the shack before dawn, slipping away without a word. Sam had known even before he saw the empty cot. Tom was going to the soldiers to warn them, perhaps to beg forgiveness, perhaps to save his own skin. The betrayal weighed heavy. Yet Sam could not bring himself to curse his brother. He understood Tom's fear. He understood it, but he could not follow it. When the sun crested the horizon, the battle began. The soldiers came with volleys of gunfire, the crack of rifles splitting the silence, echoing against the cliffs. The Apache warriors answered with arrows, with rifles of their own, with cries that carried across the canyon like thunder. The ground shook with the charge of horses, the scream of men, the wail of the wounded. Sam found himself in the chaos, rifle in hand, though he could barely hear for the roar of battle. He saw soldiers fall, saw warriors fall, saw blood soaking into the thirsty desert, and through it all he saw her, Ashtoitso, riding at the front, her hair streaming, her lance flashing like lightning. She fought not as a symbol but as a force of nature, her voice rising above the gunfire, urging her people on. Sam followed her like a shadow, firing when he could, fighting when he must, always keeping his eyes on her, not out of strategy but out of something deeper, something he could no longer deny. And then, through the smoke and the screams, he saw Tom. His brother stood among the soldiers, rifle raised, his face pale, twisted with fear and fury. Their eyes met across the chaos. For one heartbeat, time froze. 20 years of shared hunger, laughter, pain, and blood hung between them. Sam's grip faltered. Tom's lips moved, words lost in the thunder of battle, but the meaning was clear enough. "Don't do this." But Sam had already chosen. He turned back toward Ashtoitso, and in that instant Tom's shot rang out. Sam staggered, the world lurching, fire burning in his chest. The rifle slipped from his hands. He fell to his knees, his breath torn from him. Ashtoitso wheeled her horse, her cry splitting the air. She rode to him, dismounting, catching him before he struck the ground. The battle raged on around them, but in that moment there was only the two of them. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice breaking, though her eyes burned with fury. "Why?" He forced his breath, ragged, shallow. "Because 20 years ago I chose to save you, and I'd choose it again." Her hand trembled as she pressed it to his wound, as though she could hold back death itself, but his strength was slipping fast, the edges of the world dimming. Still he looked at her, and in his fading gaze she saw not just the rancher who had carried her from the canyon, but the man who had found something worth living and dying for. Behind them, The battle began to turn. The soldiers, bolstered by numbers, pressed the warriors back. Tom shouted orders, his voice raw, but his eyes never left the place where his brother lay. Guilt clawed through him like fire, though it was far too late to undo what he had done. Nashtoitso rose, her face a mask of grief and wrath. She called out to her warriors, her voice rising above the storm, sharper than any trumpet. "For every drop of blood spilled, for every life taken, we will not bow." Her warriors surged again, a final charge that split the army's line. Chaos consumed the canyon once more, but Sam heard none of it. His world narrowed to her touch, her voice, her tears falling against his face. With his last breath, he whispered, "Don't forget me," and then he was gone. The battle dragged on until dusk, the land littered with the fallen, the dust red with blood. When it ended, neither side could claim victory. The soldiers limped back toward the fort, broken and bloodied. The Apache warriors carried their dead into the hills, and in the center of it all, Nashtoitso stood alone beside the body of the man who had once saved her, and who had given his life again for her cause. Tom survived, though he was never the same. Some said he left the ranch and wandered west, chasing drink and cards until he disappeared into the deserts of Nevada. Others claimed they saw him years later, a broken man muttering to himself about his brother's ghost. But of Nashtoitso, the stories grew into legend. They said she led her people for years, that she carried in her heart both love and sorrow, that she never spoke the name of the rancher who had died for her. But in the darkest nights, when the wind swept the desert, she would stand alone and whisper it to the stars.